Welcome to Mindful School Marketing, your go-to podcast for personal and professional growth.
We're school marketers, business owners, and moms passionate about connecting other school professionals with tools and strategies for success.
We love solving problems, exploring new ideas, and thinking outside the box. Let's transform your school and life starting right now. Transform your school's admissions and marketing with Inquiry Tracker, the ultimate solution for managing inquiries seamlessly. Discover how you can make your admissions process more efficient and effective with this leading solution.
Welcome to Mindful School Marketing. I'm Aubrey Bursch.
And I'm Tara Clays. Today, I'm so excited. We're joined by Jordache Johnson. He's an AI strategist and founder of Never Tech Behind, who helps organizations successfully integrate AI into their workflows while keeping humans at the center. Through his innovative ADAPT system, DICE method, and AHAA Framework, Jordache transforms how companies implement AI to achieve tangible results. He is known for making complex AI concepts accessible to everyone, from solo entrepreneurs to executive teams. And we are so excited to dive into this conversation. Welcome, Jordache.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you guys. Looking forward to our conversation. I think it's going to be a good one.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to dive in. In fact, we're just going to dive in if that's okay with you.
Let's do it.
Let's do it, right? So generative AI tools like ChatGPT, which we're all familiar with, and image generators are everywhere now. You know, as we're looking at our audience, some people who may not have used these things, what is generative AI and what do you see it as the most impactful use cases for school marketers and school leaders? And where should they, be a little cautious?
Such a good question to start off with. I love this. So before I dive into some specifics on this, I always want to, give people some context. I always like to zoom out before we kind of zoom in. And one of the things I always say is we've been living with AI for decades. AI has been around since the 50s. In some form or fashion, right? So if you're, and most of us just experienced it over the last couple of decades of if you've watched Netflix or if you shop on Amazon, or if you are on any of the social media platforms, any recommendation saying, hey, you like this show, you should like this show. Hey, you like that, this person, do you know this person? Hey, somebody bought this, you should also buy this. These is all forms of AI. So the way I say this is generative AI is like a subset of AI. And this is what we've kind of been exploding onto the scene since around 2017 when the Google DeepMind paper came out. But one of the things we have to remember is when we speak about AI in general, it's a big industry. And this is why I say this is one of the technologies that's going to impact almost every aspect of our life as a consumer, as a user, as a professional, et cetera. Now, so let's kind of zoom in on Gen AI for a second. So when we talk about generative AI, this is the type of technology that is essentially creative technology because it produces new content, whether that's images, whether that's text, whether that's music, whether that's audio, et cetera, rather than just analyzing information we joke around the old AI, right? The old AI was all about classifying data and predicting data versus Gen AI is all about creating something. So the best way I always talk about this, it's like having a creative assistant who can write with you, design with you, edit with you, analyze with you, organize with you, brainstorm alongside you. And at its core, it's taking a whole bunch of data. And that's when we talk about being trained on the data. And it's basically predicting or identifying patterns and kind of predicting what it thinks you want next by creating something new. And so this is when we start talking about IP and all in the legal side of things, it's is it really copyright infringement if it's creating something new, if it's a derivative? And that's why, IP lawyers have jobs for decades to come. I always joke around. So that's kind of what we think about Gen A. It's kind of like this creative assistant that helps us create new things based off of the direction that the human gives. And so when I say direction, that's when people are talking about prompts, right? Or prompt engineer, whatever you want to say. I always talk about a direction because it's a little bit easier to understand of if I tell my 4-year-old what to do, I'm giving him directions, he should do that, right? Same thing. If I need to tell an AI what to do, I'm the human, I can direct it in whatever aspect it is. So now, when we the second part of your question was what are some use cases for school marketers and, and then the cautious side of things? Because there's always, there's the dark side with any form of technology. It can be good for, used for good or, not so good. So, some of the things that come top of mind when it comes to use cases for, school marketers when it comes to AIs, one is content acceleration, and I'm not saying producing full-blown content that's fully AI. And I'm sure we'll dive into that later on in this episode. But it's more so of, most these educators or these school marketers and the people that I know I've worked with, they're understaffed, they're overwhelmed, they got to create content across all these multiple platforms. They feel like they're on this content hamster wheel. And where AI can help, and a concept I always talk about is, let AI create that 80% draft for you. Let it create that 80% draft of a blog post or social content or newsletter, etc., while keeping the human in the loop. We're not saying, hey, AI, go do everything for me, but do a little bit. Help me do this, because one of the things us as humans, it's a lot easier for us to edit than it is to create. And we can spend more time on the strategy and the refinement of that versus staring at a blank page. So content acceleration is a big area when it comes to anything marketing, sales related, whether you're in education or not. But one thing specifically in the school space is personalization at scale. And what do I mean by that is because without massive time and investment that's usually required to personalize content, personalize communication, we have this amazing technology that can speed that up. And for example, because when you're thinking about in a school situation, there's a lot of stakeholders, right? There's a lot of different segments I got to talk to, from prospective families at various stages of that decision-making process, to current parents, to alumni, to donors. And we can use AI and take our core message and tailor the follow-up, tailor the messaging based off of that individual persona, right? And if you understand if you're picking up what I'm talking about, this is nothing new in marketing. It's, how do I talk to a persona? How do I talk to one person? How do I talk to that's something that relates? And I would joke around with my 7th grade speech teachers, my job as the communicator is to make sure the receiver gets my message. It's the same thing here. Now we can just do it with less effort, but actually more effectively, because AI can actually start taking our message and, translating it to individuals on that. And then the last thing I'll say, just from a use case, is data interpretation, analyzing survey responses, looking at application or trends or engagement metrics to help surface these insights and these patterns that us as humans may have not missed, or we may not have been able to connect the dots right out. And that's what when I was saying earlier with AI, especially Gen AI, it's very, very good at identifying patterns and looking at trends and connecting dots. And so those are just some of the things top of mind that I can think about when it comes to, use cases. I'm sure we can talk some more specifics later on. Now, the last part of your question, the cautious side, what do we need to be concerned with? And what are the things? And this is part of being the responsible AI user, the responsible AI implementer, right? And one thing is, and this is across every business I work with, and this is usually within the top 3 questions, how do we maintain our authentic voice or our brand voice? Or if it's an entrepreneur, how do we make sure that, it doesn't sound robotic in a sense, right? And when it comes to schools, your school has a unique culture, has values, and this generic AI output won't capture it without proper guidance and context, which we can dive in. This is kind of what DICE is about and things along those lines, which we can dive in here in a little bit. But the last 2 things I would say that are always big when it comes to AI is factual accuracy and biases. You got to understand that AI is confidently wrong sometimes. And what do I mean by that? It's going to give you an answer. It's going to tell you, yes, it's rarely going to tell you, I don't know that, unless it's against their terms or services. So it's going to give you something. You as a human got to say, is that right? Does that make sense? Do I need a fact check? Are those numbers correct? Especially when you're analyzing data and things like that, right? And then obviously, biases. And so the way you kind of look at that is whatever you're having AI assist you with, you got to kind of understand the risk associated. When I mean risk, it's if I'm in the education space and I'm having AI help with my curriculum or policies or mission requirements, that's high risk, right? That's very there's some big consequences if something goes wrong on that side. So we need to be extra cautious and extra human review, or make sure we're using the right models or biases aren't in play, right? And then the last thing I'll say cautious is, the transparency side of things. Now, you're going to hear people from all sides of camps on this, right? Because I'm not the type of person that says you need to announce of saying, hey, I wrote this email. This email was drafted with AI assistance in the bottom of my footer, right? I've seen people do that, right? Oh, this was made by a human and AI. It's okay, I don't go that far, because the way I think about this is, if I'm writing a newsletter or if I'm writing a blog post and I use spell check, do I have to disclose that I use spell check or grammar check to help me make this more effectively? Now, if the human wasn't involved at all, there's some deceivement there. But I think what we're going to see a lot of this transparency comes into play is as we get more of these voice agents. If you're talking to somebody, am I talking to a human or am I talking to an AI person? And so the way that I always kind of judge this is like, how do you just maintain a human connection, your communications, but at the same time, like, how do I just be a good person? I know this sounds corny, but it's like, I'm not trying to deceive somebody, but if I can communicate, if AI can make me a better communicator that makes sense with you, like me as a receiver wants that. Like, I want you to use any tools at your disposal to help me learn, help me connect, or help me educate me on something or connect with me on some point. So that's when I kind of look at those cautions of, it's whatever makes you comfortable. But, on an organizational level, these are the conversations you need to have when it comes to like drafting your AI policies and your governance policies, because, you need to make sure your brand's not at risk with some of this stuff.
Wow, that is great. So much information. Let's kind of go back and say, like, if the school is taking all this in,
Mhm.
where should they start if they're just beginning to explore these tools? They've just scratched the surface and set up a ChatGPT account or something.
Great question. Great question. So I will say this, when it comes to AI, this is a new skill that you're learning, right? And this is and people need to understand this is a new skill. And what happens when it comes to new skills? We typically suck at them, right? Like if I pick up a violin, I'm going to break some strings right now, right? If I try to play the piano, like I don't have musical ability because I never practiced, I never played, I never did this stuff, right? So one thing you always got to give yourself grace with this, right? And people, there's ego that comes in, but there's a whole psychological and sociology side of things when it comes to adopting technologies that I talk a lot about in my newsletters, which is fun. But like there's these invisible forces. So make sure you're aware of some invisible forces that are going to prevent you from this. Now, when it comes to using this stuff, I always say you got to experiment with this. We have to get back to our mindset of like being curious and experimenting with this. So if you have ChatGPT or if you have Claude or Gemini or any of these main foundational model tools, start simple and start small, but start looking at things from what are things that I do not like doing that I just want to have assistance with? Or on the flip side, what are things that I love doing that I just want to get more creativity out of this? Or I want to be able to have it think, or like I always like one of the way I use AI a lot and in my day to day is a sparring partner. And what do I mean by that? It's like, yo, tell me, poke holes in whatever I'm saying, my arguments, my thoughts, my ideas. What am I missing? Like it gives me somebody to bounce ideas off of, or my brainstorms, like helps me organize my thoughts. I go on walks every morning. I talk to myself in my voice memos, and I have, AI tools or prompts in my AI tools that will just organize this stuff for me. So help me organize my thoughts, right? So like there's little things like that you can start small with. But then what it really comes down to this is when we're looking at how do we start integrating AI into our organizations or on our teams, we have to start looking at our workflows. A lot of people look at tools first versus saying, what are we doing extremely well already and how can we make it better? Or what problems are we facing that maybe AI can help us solve? And so when we look at our workflows, we start looking at mapping out, here are all the steps that it takes me to do A, B, C, D to achieve D. And then I can start, when I break that down on a task level, then I can start identifying, well, hey, can AI help me write this or ideate on this or analyze this or edit this or give me more ideas or spar with me on this specific task. And then that's when you kind of find these little pieces in a workflow that will allow you to start injecting AI. And I always say, like, Rome wasn't built in a day. You're not integrating AI in every aspect of your business in a day. It's these little small wins that build up your learning and your experience by doing versus just consuming. And because when you learn AI, unlike a lot of skills, this isn't a linear learning where I'm just going to go take a course, I'm going to be good at AI. It is, you learn it by doing, you learn it by experimenting, you learn it by understanding what models may be better at a specific task or other. And then all that knowledge starts getting built up. And then you're going to be able to have this exponential learning curve decrease at the end of the day. So
I love the way that you talked about it in terms of, like, we do a lot of plannings with teams in schools. And I love the idea of looking at your workflow and asking, how can AI like make this better, easier? Or, I think that is so important for school leaders to consider as they're like examining their workflows. Like, do you see some, key tools that are effective in certain workflow areas. I mean, a lot of us know about ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and all those things, but like, do you have any, thoughts around key tools in certain workflow areas?
Yeah, 100%. So one of the things that we have to like start changing our mindset around is as we start utilizing AI a lot more, we have to, and this goes back to like when I was saying earlier, we have to give it direction. And that's not just better prompting, it is the context and the information. Because one of the things I always say is AI is very, very smart when it comes to world knowledge, when it comes to, all this, it has all this data in it, but it's very, very dumb when it comes to you, your business, your organization, your team, the stuff that's on that nitty gritty level, right? And so when you're talking about, when we're doing planning meetings or et cetera, you need to capture those meetings, right? You have these meeting note takers. I use Otter all the time. It's on my phone. It's in my Zooms. It's when I'm going to events, I'm recording because my mind is now trained of, if you give me a transcript, we can go do some damage, good damage with AI, right? And what does that allow me to do? Especially like when I'm in calls or when I'm on calls with clients where I'm doing planning or I'm doing workshops or I'm doing keynotes, I can stay present and focused on the individual and the conversation at hand because I know it's being captured in the background. I know I can reference it. I know I can analyze it. I know I can extract things. I can get word for word things from that. So that's one thing is Otter or there's Fathom. There's a couple other, any of these recording tools. You want to start capturing this stuff, okay? Two other things I would say is Notebook LM by Google is a great, great tool. And it's great because when I'm using a ChatGPT or I'm using a Claude or I'm using a Gemini, et cetera, yes, I can put some constraints around it and start, giving it some context and uploading documents and all this stuff, but it's still pulling from all its world knowledge. And so, or all of its other data is what I mean by world knowledge. And when we're using Notebook LM, I can bring in specific sources that it's using Google's model Gemini to be able to just only pull from them those sources. So when I want to go deep on a topic or when I want to learn specifically around this or connect one domain to another domain and start doing some cross-domain analysis or whatever it means or planning, the reality that it comes down to that is I'm able to just use Notebook LM because I can put a lot of sources in there. It's like 300 notebooks that have 500,000 words each. It's millions of words. I can just build kind of my own little model on that. So that's one thing. The other thing is within ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, when you're doing these planning meetings or when you're doing these things that are repetitive, or whether it's weekly, daily, quarterly, whatever, creating projects inside of there. Right. And they used to be, you can still build custom GPTs. I rarely build custom GPTs anymore, but it's ChatGPT projects or Claude projects or whatever, where you're just saying, hey, for this one specific task, I already have it trained. I can just go drop my stuff in there and it's going to do whatever I want it to do. And I'll give you like a personal example. That is, like I was saying earlier, like I talk a lot to myself on voice memos when I'm doing my morning walks. I literally just copy that transcript, drop it into a Claude project, and it analyzes in the format that I want and the things that I want, what I want to extract, questions I want to follow, questions, things like that, because that's something that I'm doing consistently. So instead of me having to open up a tool like that, I can just use that over and over and over again. So those would be, I would say, Notebook LM, Otter, setting up projects, and then those would probably be the three that I would recommend right now. Just thinking through you can do a lot of damage with those three tools within a workflow at this point in time. Data analysis is a little bit differently, but those, from a planning, organizing, analyzing, creation standpoint, those would be the go-to.
I'm curious because I've basically just a Chat GPT user. That's the one I've become familiar with and have a paid membership to. So I haven't really played with Claude. My developer uses Claude. Aubrey and I were talking about Gemini the other day. So I think those three, right? Am I right? Those are the top three sort of general AI tools that are used. I was going to see if so, compare them for us. Like what's
Great
your favorite
question.
or what are the differences? Why would I use one versus the other? I feel now like I've invested in ChatGPT, not just financially, but like it knows me now. But I'm curious, I'm a shiny object syndrome sufferer. So, tell me what I'm missing or
Yeah,
what.
great.
Yeah.
And actually, this is a very relevant question to ask now, and I'll point out what I mean by that in a second. So, what we're talking about here, we call them foundational models, right? These are the models that come out of these AI labs. So, like you said, Gemini, Claude from Anthropic, OpenAI, or ChatGPT from OpenAI. You also have Llama from Meta, aka Facebook. You have Mistral from I can't remember the company out of France. And you have Grok from X or from Twitter, etc. Those are kind of the core models right now. And and so when it comes to, and this goes back to kind of the workflow question, like you want to understand like what is the best tool to use for the workflow or the task at hand. And before I get into specifics, one thing I will say, and one of the things you just kind of mentioned was all these tools can do things pretty well, to be honest with you. But some of them do things a little bit better. And why I say that is because if you're comfortable and you're using one of these tools, like you don't always have to have the latest and greatest. A little bit of strategic AI can add a lot of value in your life, right? Now, one thing I will say though is when these AI models are trained on all that data, there's like two parts to the training. There's the pre-training, which is they're ingesting all this data to basically kind of build out their models that they're building on. And then there's the post-training aspect. And that's kind of when they fine tune it, or they add a little bit more personality, or they add a little bit more context, things like that, right? And that's kind of an important step, because what I found when I test things out, Claude, Anthropic, I use that maybe 90% of my time when I'm creating things, because it has more personality. It has a little bit more humanness when it comes to how it writes and creates content. And it's very, very good at coding as well. So that's one that I've typically found myself using when I'm creating, helping AI assist me with emails or, content or whatever it is. When it comes to, ChatGPT, one thing that, and this is why I was saying right after you asked the question, this is a very relevant thing, is because one thing that ChatGPT recently announced is this kind of ongoing memory, meaning it's starting to remember across all of your chats. Previously, like every new chat you would start within one of these models, it would have this context window, right? How much does it remember in that chat for it to kind of reference and use this? And these context windows get bigger and bigger and bigger every model release. It's kind of like an iPhone. There's a new and better camera, megapixels every release. But when it comes down to what ChatGPT recently releases, now it's like, hey, we're looking at all of your chats. We're bringing in all this knowledge and this context around this chat. So it's kind of because, and this is where a lot of them are going, and this is why it's relevant, is because they're trying to lock us into these models. If you think about this, because the switching cost of me going from ChatGPT to Claude, it's $20 a month. It's death by $20 a month subscriptions we always joke about, but like there's nothing holding me to that. But if I'm using the model enough and now it has all this context about me and all my writing, etc., that's a bigger shift, right? So this is what I'm saying, is use what's comfortable. So, I'll use ChatGPT a lot when it comes to, like, I feel like they're reasoning models, they're thinking models when I need to do like from some complex questions. I feel like their O4 and O3 models are a little bit better than Sonnet 3.7, which is, Claude's latest model. Data analysis, I usually find I use ChatGPT a little bit more when it comes to that as well. When it comes to like big context windows, meaning like what models can take in the most information, if I'm dropping in like, let's say four PDFs of books and all this other information, Gemini and Google has the biggest context windows out there, right? There are 1 million, 2 million tokens is what they call, which is about, whenever you hear tokens, like it's 75%. Rule of thumb is about 75% of the token number is the amount of words. So if it's 1 million tokens, it can remember 750,000 words, give or take, here and there. And so like that is like when you want to ingest a lot of data or a lot of information, Gemini is usually one that I'm going to go to for the first step of the analysis, because it can handle a lot of that context. But then like I usually pull that over into Claude if I'm trying to like, write the analysis or do things like that. So I'm using Claude a lot more from writing. ChatGPT is a little bit more from the data analysis side of things, and Gemini is more of the big context window side of things. But one thing I will mention though is before we move on to this is where experimentation comes into play. So believe it or not, I'm one of these, it's kind of part of my job, but like I pay for all these tools, right? Like, so I'm paying, I don't even look at my monthly subscriptions anymore. It's like, it is what it is. I have all these tools. But like when I'm doing things, if I'm like, even when I'm preparing, like like when I do a lot of keynote talks, right? So like when I'm doing the research on the industry and figuring out how to tie in my messaging and doing all that stuff, like I use AI a lot to help me kind of craft my story, craft my throughput line, all the other things, and do research. But I'm also like, when I'm doing that, I might have Gemini pulled up with ChatGPT, asking it the same exact prompt, or Claude asking it, because they're all going to give me little things a little bit differently. And I'm like, oh, I like what that said over there. Let me pull this over here, right? So I'm kind of like Frankenstein in the outputs a little bit and learning about what it is. And the reason why I'm telling you to like start doing that is because you'll start picking up what are the differences? What are the little nuances? And this is just part of that AI literacy, AI learning, and AI skill building. So you can start identifying, oh, if I need to solve this task, here's probably the model I'm going to start with, because based off past experiences, it's usually giving me better data analysis or better writing or better, whatever the output may be. So
This is fascinating. I'm so grateful for you for sharing all that information. That is amazing. I do have kind of a follow-up question regarding Gemini, or just in general. Like, a lot of schools use Google Workspace. Like, they're housing all their Google Docs. They're usually Sheets. They're all the stuff. Is it with Gemini tied to Google? Like, is that a better route to go if you're trying to kind of set up systems within your workspace? Or is it a combination? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
great question. So, and these are the conversations I'm having a lot of times with the leadership teams and the executive teams that I work with, because there's a few things you have to keep in mind. Like, when it comes to data and data security, like if you're like a lot of these organizations that I work with, like they already vetted and they've already gone through the whole procurement process, and our data stored on either AWS or Google Cert or Google Cloud or whatever like that. And so it makes sense to kind of keep that data siloed into there, right? And keeping that. So, it's that's one part of it, right? To thinking through like, where's my data being stored? Do I already trust them, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the other thing I will add though is like with Gemini specifically, and this is something we see a lot in corporate as well, like with Microsoft Copilot is their kind of attempt at this. You're starting to see it injected in all their different other tools, right? You start seeing like, hey, analyze your email, or hey, use Gemini to see what's in this Google Drive folder, etc. Personally, I typically don't use those like little add-on. Like I always say, like if you remember, like I'm gonna age myself, but like remember in the early Microsoft days, a little clip, like, little annoying little paper clip that used to sit on Microsoft documents. Like, hey, I'm just little, like that's what it reminds me of, and it just drives me crazy. Because I don't feel like it's nearly as effective. It's just like shortcuts in a sense, right? It can be valuable. So like, but where I do see value when it comes to Gemini, etc., is they're catching up, and because all these tech companies, all these big tech companies, Meta, Google, Amazon, all these guys, they got caught, I always say, with their pants down when ChatGPT dropped. Google's been working on AI for 2 decades, but they weren't working, and they created the freaking research paper of that was the foundation of GPTs, right? In 2017, they released it. But what ChatGPT brought to us was that consumer experience. It was the first time on a mass scale that us as an individual, us as consumers, could tap into this generative AI technology, and they weren't ready for that. And so Google's been playing catch up, and they're getting better, and their models are getting better, and it is a good place to start if this is the environment you're already working in. And obviously, like Notebook LM, if you're in Google Workspace, you get Notebook LM for free with the pro version. So there's a lot of value that's already kind of in that ecosystem. So it's a good place to start. Now, what I would then though, as AI starts becoming more and more prevalent within an organization or within a school, then you start looking at it on a team level, because if I'm a marketer and I'm creating communications and content, yes, I could use Gemini and eventually help me do that. But there's probably a better use of my time to start getting Claude involved at some aspect of that, right? And so that's where you start looking at it on a case by case basis. But once again, the tool has to be vetted by the organization, IT, legal, etc. Start looking at the terms. How's the data? And this is where I work with organizations like developing these AI policies and these governance policies. Because if you don't do that, believe it or not, your employees are using it one way or the other, whether you want to believe it or not. So it's like stop putting your organization at risk because, and put some, guardrails around what data can be used, especially like in schools. Like, can student data be used? Should we be sending student data to servers, or do we need to have an open source model that's offline, but we can still tap into AI using some stuff like that? So that's where all these questions are. But to answer your question, if the ecosystem's already built around Google Workspace, people are comfortable with it, it is a good place to start. And then as you kind of get more mature with the adoption of AI in your organization, you can start finding different use cases to start potentially bringing in some other tools.
Thank you. This is so helpful. I have been so excited to be using these tools and saving so much time. I was telling you when we started that I was using it for code, and it's just been a game changer for me in many ways. I even have had some like personal chats with it, which it's become really an invaluable tool. Before I ask my next question, though, this is a quick one. Do you say thank you and please?
Gotta love the internet with the rumors. Yeah. You know, there was a time that people have done studies that sometimes you will get better, it will give you better responses from this. The joke around is like, I'm always gonna say please and thank you, because when they, take over the human race, they're gonna remember who's kind to you. I used to like do it a lot more, but like, I also just found myself like, that's just like how I talk a lot. Like,
Same.
I say, please,
Yeah.
thank you. Like, I appreciate you. Thanks for that. Like, but one thing I will say though, is when it comes to like specific language that you're using, when you're, giving AI these directions, if you really want to emphasize something, or you really want to, and one part of these directions we talk about is like putting constraints of like, what do I not want it to do? What do I not want it to, say? Do not use the word revolutionary. Do not use the word game changing, because it loves to use these kind of, very, fluffy words when it comes to content and writing. And so like, you can direct it where you can quote unquote punish it, if you want to say, like, if you use this word, you are going to XYZ, or I'm going to reward you with $1 million if you do not use this word. Things like little things like that, just to kind of play and experiment with it. You'll start seeing like, and you don't have to go to that extent, but like, how can you be stern? And I honestly, like, as a relatively new parent, I have a 4-year-old and a 4-month-old. It's like, how can I communicate it with like, to make sure that you truly understand what I'm saying here, right? And that's the thing where people like, I got to understand, like, we are having a conversation with a child, in the sense of like, I got to be a very good communicator to make sure I'm articulating exactly what I want. And that's why a lot of people struggle, because a lot of people struggle with, effective communication. And the other thing too is, a lot of people struggle with being a manager, and AI is basically making us all managers, right? And leadership. And how do I effectively communicate? How do I make sure I give it enough information and context and goals? So I say all that because I don't say thank you much anymore, but I'm very cognizant of the language and the words that I'm using to make sure I'm setting it up to give the results that I want it to give. But yeah, the whole, please, thank you. I don't,
So
I'm not going to take my
interesting.
time to analyze
Yeah.
the data if it makes sense.
I just do it just out of habit. And so
I
I
do
was
too.
curious
I
if I'm
talk to her like it's a
crazy.
human, right? Like, I'm literally talking to her
Exactly.
like, you're my best friend sitting next to me and helping me
And
out.
it
I'm like, oh, I
talks back
appreciate
to you like that too.
Right.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
It's crazy. All right, let me ask you about, when I introduced you, I mentioned all these different platforms that you have. So Adapt System and the DICE method, and we also mentioned AHAA. So these are things that can help organizations implement AI in a structured way.
Yep.
Can you walk us through these programs a little bit, and how a school might apply one of these frameworks to a marketing or admissions challenge?
Yeah. Great question. So I'll start with Adapt. So Adapt's kind of like one of the things I always talk about is like, organizations and leaders, and doesn't matter what industry you're in, we have to start building a culture and ecosystem to have like an AI first culture. And when I say AI first, I'm not saying remove the humans and lay people off, and that's so short-term thinking, but it's more so, how do I create an ecosystem that allows this technology to thrive and scale and actually unlock the value that it actually can provide? So what ADAPT stands for is align, develop, analyze, plan, train. So let me break these down real quick. So, and this is really from a leadership level, whether it's a team lead or an organization lead, etc. But like, this is where with Align, you have to align your AI strategy with your business goals. And typically what that starts with is building out an internal AI council. And I don't care if you're a 5-person team. I don't care if you're a 5,000-person team. There needs to be an AI council that's going to kind of take the lead and be the guiding force and to kind of allow or improve the chances of AI adoption in your organization. And the larger your organization is, they also kind of become the leaders where your team members and your employees can come to or bring their ideas for, and they kind of help shape the strategy and align the goals with the business, with the leadership team, with the AI strategy, and kind of do this. So an AI council is like a vital piece within an organization. The D, develop, is when we start talking about AI governance and policies. I kind of touched on that before. What data can go in, what tools are approved, how are we able to use it? Like what's been vetted, because, the worst thing you can do is start putting in, private data into something that doesn't have the right terms of service. And then, you just put your whole organization at risk. So that's why putting these guardrails is in place. And this is where, legal can come into play and make sure, and IT and all that other stuff. The A in adapt for is analyze use cases and launch pilots. And this is what I always talk about of like, you have to start small. The best AI implementation and the highest level success is when you start small and we start identifying these use cases, and whether it's on an individual level or a team level. I do a lot of workshops with organizations, just helping them identify use cases specifically for their teams or the organizations, and then launching these little pilots. And what I mean by pilot, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, proving the value, proving the use case. And this is what also allows you to vet the vendors, where you're not signing up for, year-long contracts. Next thing you know, no one's using it 3 months in because there wasn't appropriate training. They didn't do what every tool launched today, or a tool that has AI powered this, AI this, AI this, and you have to vet them, because just because you slap ChatGPT inside of your tool, like, is that really am I really getting value from that? So there's like a whole, vendor analysis, things like that. But identifying these use cases and launching pilots is big. And then from the P in adapt is planning and your AI roadmap and scaling, right? And this is like when we start looking out 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. Okay, now we have some pilots in there. How do we start, building out a roadmap to start basically integrating AI in other aspects, other workflows and things along those lines? This is where the AI council comes into play. This is where the AI strategy, all these things work. But the last part is T, which is training and upskilling your team. The biggest risk in most organizations right now is AI literacy. People just, the team doesn't, there's not enough, of support on training, bringing in outside people to come in, doing internal trainings, whatever it may be. Training and upskilling your team is going to be one of the most vital things to do over the next, 6, 12, 18 months. Because one of two things is going to happen. Either your team's not going to be skilled and they're going to be left behind, quote unquote, or the people that are skilled, if they don't have the support to continue to upskill them, they're going to leave to find organizations that do. And that's where it comes to talent retention and all these other things as well. So that's kind of what adapt is. So like, that's really the overarching, how do all these pieces build out this kind of ecosystem in there. Now, when it comes to specifically Dice, and this is where I want to kind of dive into some specific use cases, because I think this is probably a little bit more applicable to individuals and smaller teams. So Dice is, I always talk about it's the system before it's the system. So it's before I delegate, I need a document. And what do I mean by that? Before I delegate a task to AI, I need to have some documents or some data, information, context, examples. That's what DICE stands for: data, information, context, examples, to be able to give it that specific thing. This goes back to what I was saying before. AI is very, very smart around things, but it's very, very dumb when it comes to our own specific situations, our schools, our specific students, our whatever it is in our own little kind of world. We have to educate the AI system on that. So when we're talking about data, what are we talking about here? Enrollment statistics, your inquiry to enrollment conversion rates, your demographic information, your survey results, website analytics, social, and all these things that we already have data on. This is the gold. I always say all organizations are sitting on gold. They're just not mining it right now for when it comes to this AI world. They're in this AI gold rush. So we have to look at this data, because this data is going to be what's going to set us apart in this AI driven world, because no one else has this data. No one else has this information besides the organization. And when it comes to like the information side of things, it's really, taking that data and then telling a story around that, right? So really, like if you're looking at it from a school standpoint, it may be taking some survey information and truly understanding what program was the most interest to certain family demographics and things like that. And I'm saying all this stuff right now, and I promise you it will make sense, because if we have this stuff readily available to us, and we have access to this in a Google Drive, in a Google Doc somewhere, in a Google Sheet, we can then feed that into AI, and we just gave it a lot more context to get a lot more personalized results around us, around the task that we're going to delegate to that, right? But the big one I would say is the C part of DICE, which is context, okay? Especially in the school, because this is what I was saying earlier, like schools have an amazing advantage when it comes to AI, because you think about all the unique aspects of a school. They have stories, they have history, they have special traditions, they have community values, they have, their founding story, their teaching methodologies, all these unique things that make a school unique. But the AI doesn't know anything about that. So if we have that captured somewhere in a document, we have that captured somewhere, and there's easy ways to do this with the help of AI, actually, to capture this stuff, then I can feed that into AI, Claude, whatever it may be, to help me write emails that will connect with the right individuals. And when I can combine that with, the student personas or the parent personas, it's kind of like you're building a recipe. All those little things together are specific, are kind of basically come together and feed off each other. And then the last thing is the examples. And this is when we start talking about brand voice, when we talk about brand style, when we talk about, how do we help AI sound like us? And it's through examples, things that we've already written. We've already created emails that we know work. We've already created social content that we know that works. We've already created marketing material that from an admission standpoint that we know attracts people. We'll give AI examples of what success looks like in your world, and let that be the foundation that AI can be built upon. So when we're thinking about so the last part of your question was like, how does this work like in specific situations? Like, for like enrollment, think about, like, if I think about enrollment for a second here, right? There's a pipeline. It's a sales pipeline, right? Like, if you look at it a bit, it's a marketing pipeline, a sales pipeline, enrollment, slap whatever it is. I'm trying to take somebody along a customer journey, right? And the key is I got to nurture those people depending on what stage they're at. This is literally customer journey 101. And if I can understand, if I'm communicating with with an individual at the right stage of their journey, and it's personalized to them, there's going to be building a connection, right? So when we think about that, and you look at to kind of how DICE comes into play with that, is we need to know kind of what are the conversion rates at each step of this enrollment journey, in a sense, right? What is our baseline that we're building off of? That's data that we would be able to share with AI. What's working? Where's the gaps? What it is? And humans can look at that and say, oh, there's a drop here. There's a drop here. Great. But I need to tell AI so it's aware of that as we're starting to kind of improve our enrollment pipeline. The information layer of the I in this specific situation is, what does successful enrollments look like? If you do surveys and you ask parents, why did you choose us? Look at those responses. And if you have that survey data of why they chose our school, there's probably distinct patterns that AI can pick up, saying, well, looking at this, the top 3 things that keep getting mentioned over and over is this. Well, we need to extract that out. If that's worked in the past, we need to let AI know that this has worked in the past. Make sure we keep this in account as we continue to, write emails or create social content and create marketing material to move somebody from, step B to step C in the journey, right? And then the last thing, the context and examples in this pipeline, and this is where I think a lot of people, it's so simple that I think a lot of people miss it. But this is also where AI can give us time to start doing more things like this. I was coaching somebody. She was a school leader in a Montessori school, right? And this one of my one-on-one coaching clients at the time. And one of the things that we were doing with her was, we were making it easy, and this is kind of like where Otter comes into play, or voice memos, but like record voice notes after meaningful family conversations, or after something happened on campus that was like, oh, that's a cool, fun story. That's a fun thing. And just capturing that information and start building an example library that AI can then reference to maintain that kind of warm, personal tone when scaling communications, or pulling personal stories or things that have happened that, that you probably forgot by the end of the day, that would probably be a great story to tell in an email to move somebody from coin. So like that's that context and examples of being able to kind of build all this information, this data beforehand, and building these libraries up. So when we are ready to use AI, we have all these different, I call them assets, that we can pull from and that we can give to. And when I say assets, like literally I use Google Drive. So I call them DICE reports. So I have a DICE report around who my I call them ICA, ideal client avatar. Like I know their pains, their problems, their desires, their goals. Marketing 101, but I have it documented. So I can, when I'm writing an email and I want to talk to that one individual, I can say, hey, AI, here's who I'm talking to. Here's the problems they're facing. Here's all the other things I'm facing. Here's some personalized stories that I've captured along the way. Can you write me an email? Help me write a draft of an email that tells a story that would make sense to them, that would solve a problem. That's a lot of brain power I used to have to do beforehand in copywriting. Now I can just bring these pieces together, mix it in the mixing bowl, which is kind of the AI, give me the cake afterwards, and I can put the frosting on afterwards, right? And so that's kind of when we think about Dice is how do we set up these capturing mechanisms to keep this information organized and stored, and what kind of things should we be capturing? Because these are all little assets that we can use to help us personalize the AI.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack there. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know our audience is going to enjoy listening to that and thinking about that. There's just so much that you can do with AI, and especially with the systems you mentioned here today. I'm going to switch kind of our focus right now and switch us to our rapid fires. Are you ready for rapid fire? Quick question, quick answer session.
Oh, quick is, you put a microphone in front of me, you can choose. Quick is tough sometimes.
We're running out of time. All right.
I'm sorry. Let's go. Let's go.
All right. If you could put one book as mandatory reading in your the high school curriculum, what would it be?
Mindset, Carol Dweck.
All right.
Fundamentally change how I think about learning and growth, which is very applicable with what we're talking about today.
Awesome. All right. Next question. Quick answer. What is one app you could not live without?
I do two. I'm going to do two. Perplexity, Otter.
Love it. What are you reading right now?
Quick. I have like 4 books going right now. I would say one right now is I'm going back through to kind of give me some balance in this AI tech world, Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. And I'm approaching reading a whole different way with AI now, which is very fascinating. So
that's awesome.
My gosh, that sounds like another episode right there.
Yeah,
okay.
There's probably 4 episodes that we could go deep in on all of them right here. So
thank you so much. All right, one last question. What is one great piece of advice that you can leave us with?
There's like 4 that I'm thinking through right now. Start capturing you and your organization's brilliance today. I think capturing is what's going to set us apart, and it's going to allow you to personalize AI, and even how we use AI now, and as we move into AI agents, and as this technology evolves, that first person data is going to be important. So capture.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been just jam-packed, and we are so grateful for your time and all of the information. Where can people find you online, Jordache?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best place to find me, Jordache Johnson. I'm an 80s baby, and my mother loved the brand of jeans, spelled the same way. But the other thing, what I'll do is for your audience, because I know we kind of touched on Dice. So I'm putting together a free email course that will dive deep into Dice. So we'll put the link in the show notes, but it will probably be jordache.live/mindful. And they can get access to that and get on my email list. And one thing about my email list, hit reply, ask me questions. I reply. I'm a human. I actually don't use AI in my email. So if there's something that you want to follow up with on that we talked about today, do not hesitate to hit reply.
Oh my gosh, this is awesome. Thank you. Can't wait. We will put that in the show notes for sure.
Perfect.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Have a great day. This episode is brought to you by Enquiry Tracker. We believe that every inquiry is an opportunity, and with Enquiry Tracker, you can unlock the full potential of your school's enrollment journey.
Say goodbye to missed opportunities and hello to a streamlined admissions process that prioritizes efficiency and effectiveness. Discover the leading solution for school admissions and marketing. Visit inquirytracker.net to book a personalized demo today. That's inquiry with an E, tracker.net.
Thanks for joining us on the Mindful School Marketing Podcast.
We'd love it if you pop into iTunes and leave a review, 5-star preferred. Let us know how you like the show. It helps us improve what we're doing and helps others find us too.